Cormac and Claire on Drive Time. We are back tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday evening.
The Ray D'Arcy Show on RTÉ Radio 1. Drive Time on RTÉ Radio 1. Sponsored by Zurich. For pensions, protection, savings and investments. At Zurich, we deal in peace of mind.
Hello and welcome to Drive Time. On today's show,
Budget 2026 unveiled. We get reaction and analysis.
VAT cuts for the hospitality sector, dubbed the McBudget by the opposition.
The construction sector also gets a break.
Welfare increases, a rise in the minimum wage and a change to the carers allowance.
But no income tax benefits nor one-off cost of living measures to help households.
What will the budget mean for you?
Minister for Public Expenditure Jack Chambers joins us in the next hour, and we'll get opposition reaction too.
You can text us 51551, WhatsApp us on 0870 32 32 32 or email drivetime@rte.ie. It's Cormac O'Hara and Claire Brock with you this evening. Let us know your thoughts on this budget, how it will impact you. This year, a big change, no income tax adjustments, energy credits or other one-off measures that we've become used to. The government says it's about investing in the future and securing jobs. But are you better or worse off?
Well, whether you're hoping for more cost of living measures or hoping for childcare improvements, or if you're renting or if you're in business or if you're an employee, if you're in rural or urban Ireland, let us know what you think as you pick up the little bits of pieces of info on Budget 26 throughout the programme. 51551 is the number for your text. You can WhatsApp 0870 32 32 32.
Now, as we've been saying, Minister for Finance Paschal Donohoe and Minister for Public Expenditure Jack Chambers have unveiled Budget 2026 this afternoon. It's a total €9.4 billion package, but doesn't contain energy credits, but does contain extensions to reliefs for mortgage holders and renters, as well as a cut in student fees. I'm joined now by Anna Scally, partner in KPMG in Ireland, specialising in international tax, to unpick the main features of this budget. You're very welcome along, Anna.
Thank you.
This total package is €9.4 billion, with 1.3 billion of that in tax measures.
That's correct. So only 1.3 of the full 9.4 is tax measures. The rest is public expenditure measures. The budget today was set in the backdrop of there being 2.8 million people employed in the country. And the Minister said that the modified domestic demand will grow by 3.3% in the current year and 2.3% next year. So they're all very positive factors underpinning this budget. But in addition to that, there is a backdrop of global uncertainty, significant global uncertainty that we're all aware of. And he also flagged that there's volatility in our corporation tax receipts. And we know that they have been increasing significantly over the last number of years, but there is doubt as to whether that will continue in the future. So the Minister framed this as a sensible budget, he said, aimed at protecting jobs and investing in critical infrastructure. And there he called out housing, energy, water and transport.
Now, they've put housing front and centre, and a focus of a VAT cut on apartment building to help supply, to narrow that viability gap. The question is, will it work?
Well, it is widely accepted that there is a significant viability gap between what it costs to build an apartment and what private buyers can afford to pay for that apartment. And we know that at the moment housing completions are sitting at about 30,000 mark. We need to get that up to 50 or 60,000 a year in order to meet the housing targets. So industry thinks that about 50% of those need to be apartments. And there is a significant problem in building and financing apartments. So I think the VAT measure was probably the most important and significant measure that was introduced today. So sale of completed apartments, VAT on those are reduced to 9% from the 13.5% from tonight and right out to the end of 2030. So that gives developers real certainty in relation to the future ahead. But there are also a myriad of other measures. And the question is whether they will all work to drive supply. And that obviously, fingers crossed they do, but obviously only time will tell.
And now for people looking at their pay packets, there's very little personal tax changes, Anna.
Yeah, very little or none, some might say, in relation to personal tax changes. But there were a few targeted measures, and there was also an important announcement in relation to the minimum wage. So that is to be increased to 14.15 per hour, 14.15 per hour from the 1st of January. And in line with that, there is a USC change. So the 2% bracket will be increased by about €1,300 to make sure that that higher rate of USC doesn't kick in for anybody earning up to 28,700. So that is designed to make sure that full-time workers on minimum wage remain outside the top USC bracket. And it does provide a small benefit to workers whose income are just marginally above that amount. But other than that, there was the rent credit was extended. That actually is very helpful and beneficial. So it's worth up to €1,000 for a single individual or €2,000 for a couple in any 1 year. That was extended until 2028. And mortgage interest relief is also being extended for a further 2 years. So they're positive income tax measures.
All right. And investment in jobs, briefly. I mean, the VAT rate has come down for the hospitality sector specifically. I mean, what are the government saying in terms of protecting jobs on that front?
Yeah, I mean, the hospitality and catering sector is really, really important. Creates 150,000 jobs all the way across the country. And so the reduction of the VAT rate, which won't come into effect now until 1st of July next year, will be welcome, I think, for those industries and will support businesses right across this country. The other support that was introduced is changed the R&D tax credit, which is very, very beneficial for both large and small companies. So that credit is being increased from 30% to 35%, and the first year payment threshold is being increased to 87,500 from 75,000. So that should help Irish Indigenous small companies get a refund of their R&D tax credit, a larger refund, which will help support innovation.
All right, thank you for bringing us up to date and giving us more detail on the budget. Anna Scally from KPMG, we appreciate it.
Now, our reporter Barry Lennon is here. What else should people look out for, in your opinion? You've been looking through it, Barry.
Yeah, 9.4 billion packages, as we've been saying, but the first budget after a general election rather than the last one before it. So the sweeties are in short supply. And no one-off payments, as Anna was saying, like previous years. So no double child benefit payments or electricity credits. We have those extensions to the reliefs for mortgage holders and renters, which will extend over the next 2 to 3 years. But the government framing this as an investment in our future, as we heard there. The opposition already saying ordinary workers left out in the cold, describing it as the muck budget that is benefiting developers and fast food chains.
A big focus on social welfare going into this, but what happened actually?
We'll hear from Dara Calleary, the Minister, later in the programme. He had pushed for a €12 rise in core social welfare rates. He was told to think again. Instead, it's a €10 increase, including the state pension, the disability allowance, the carers allowance, while a double Christmas bonus payment confirmed as part of that as well. The weekly fuel allowance rate will go up by €5, and it's a €2 billion package overall in social protection. A 20% rise in the disability budget, but the Disability Federation says the overall it's a betrayal of disabled people, whom they say are now €1,400 less well off than last year. A permanent €500 cut to student fees. You'll remember much political hoopla over that earlier this year. It's the first long-lasting reduction in college fees in decades, but students will actually be less well off than they were last year, because there had been, you'll recall, a €1,000 temporary cost of living reduction there.
What else? There's movement of the minimum wage.
That is going up 65 cents to €14.15 per hour. The price of cigarettes there to rise by 50 cents to €18.55 from midnight. Well, the government has already confirmed a new tax on vape liquid of 50 cents per millilitre, which will kick in on the 1st of November. 1,000 more teaching posts, as we heard there, that controversial 9% VAT rate for the hospitality sector. That's coming in from July. A new derelict property tax to replace the derelict site levy. It'll be charged at a rate of 7% on the market value of the property. The carbon tax increase to be applied from midnight tonight. Also a new VAT relief for developers as well to boost apartment building, the government says, and investments in transport. The Metrolink, a recommitment to that. More childcare places, but the opposition already saying not enough movement to bring childcare costs down to €200 a month.
It was one of the big commitments, wasn't it, in the programme for government childcare. Barry Lennon, thank you very much indeed. My God, if you are a smoker, it's about €18 plus now for a pack of cigarettes. given that increase now, a rise of 50 cent to €18.55. It is extremely expensive, and I'm sure if you could at all, you'd be thinking of cutting that habit. The government will reduce the VAT rate. Barry Lennon, thank you. The government will reduce the VAT rate on the sale of completed apartments to 9% from 13.5%, as we've been hearing, from tonight until the end of December 2030, which the Minister for Finance says is part of a social policy to deliver more and higher density apartments. Well, I'm joined on the line now by Conor O'Connell, who's Director of Housing, Planning and Development at the Construction Industry Federation, for reaction. Conor, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Cormac. Good evening.
What do you make of that, a reduction to 9%?
It's very welcome. Hopefully it's part of a whole series of measures over the last number of months that will aid apartment viability. At the moment, the only constructors, developers, purchasers of apartments are largely the state itself through the approved housing body sector or through the Land Development Agency. So the state, by reducing the level of VAT, is actually saving itself costs in terms of the forward purchase and construction of these apartments. Mm-hmm. But hopefully one of the other benefits of reducing this VAT rate will be to try and attract back international and institutional investment into the apartment sector in particular.
Yeah, we're back to the days of tax breaks for developers, and big developers at that as well, to try and kickstart more apartment dense development, I suppose you could say. Will it lead to more apartments, do you think, coming on stream?
Well, we'd be very, very hopeful that this measure will illustrate to the international and institutional investors that Ireland has a stable regulatory environment when it comes to apartment construction. And just to make the point that the biggest beneficiaries will be the state itself, because they are the only ones that are constructing apartments at the moment.
I know, but it only fixes one element, even if it does fix that, and that's the viability element. But there's also the question of enough zoned land, service land, utilities, and labour is a huge running sore, isn't it? I mean, they're not being rectified, are they?
Absolutely. I mean, everyone talks about individual solutions to the housing crisis and, the construction of apartments, the construction of homes, but it's a whole mix and a whole matrix of measures. So you mentioned there, for instance, for homes for sale, the supply of more zoned land is critical, and then following that, the supply of further infrastructure. So today's announcements in relation to 1.4 billion for Uisce Éireann to activate and enable housing delivery is very welcome. But you're right, it's one element of a whole series of policy decisions that need to be taken. Yeah. Up to now, there's been a reluctance to look at tax and taxation measures in relation to housing delivery, but we have to look at all policy levers in order to try and boost housing construction.
I'm sure we do, but this reduction in VAT for apartments and the 1.4 billion for Uisce Éireann, as you say, I mean, they all take time to kick into action, don't they? So it's not as if we're going to get the apartment blocks before the end of the year. It'll be well into next year or the year after, won't it?
It will, absolutely. There is significant concern at the moment within the residential construction sector about the pipeline from 2027 onwards. This year and next year look okay, but what this will do, hopefully, for those considering apartment construction projects, it will give them greater certainty in relation to the cost structures around delivery. And we are in a period at the moment of high energy costs, which are impacting on other construction materials right across the spectrum. So this is
carbon tax has gone up, of course.
Exactly. So this is a very welcome measure to try and control cost and input cost in the industry.
OK, Conor O'Connell, Director of Housing, Planning and Development at CIF. Thank you very much indeed for your reaction.
Now, the rent tax credit is to be extended until 2028, with Minister Donoghue saying during his speech that he is aware that this is a much needed tax credit for many. Well, for more on this and other measures in the housing area, I'm joined on the line by Anne-Marie O'Reilly, who is National Advocacy Manager with Threshold. Anne-Marie, thanks for joining us this evening. The tax credit, as I say, extended. It's currently at €1,000 for an individual, €2,000 for a couple. This is a move you'd welcome.
Yes, of course. It's very positive that the tax credit has been extended for another 3 years, and I think renters around the country will really appreciate that. Of course, we would like to have seen it increased to reflect the ongoing rent increases that we are seeing. The Minister did recognise...
What sort of increase would you like to have seen there?
Well, they've increased it by 500 before, and there was a commitment to gradually increase it. So even another 500 would have been hugely positive for renters.
All right. Having said that, I want to ask you about the national minimum wage that is going up 65 cent to €14.15 per hour, and the 2% rate band for the USE that's going to rise accordingly by €1,318 to €28,700 for people. Aside from that, there's going to be no broad taxation changes, and I'm wondering for those who are struggling to pay the rent, will these measures help?
Certainly for those who are on minimum wage, the increase will be welcome. It may not go as far as maybe everyone wanted, but when you're on a low wage like that, that type of increase can make a big difference. For those who are renting and maybe aren't on minimum wage, maybe those people are a little bit further on in their careers, and particularly those who have families, the pressure is still really going to remain for them who are having to rent their homes, unfortunately.
There's been a lot of pressure to do more in the area around derelict properties. The Minister made an announcement on that today. New derelict property tax. It will be implemented and collected by revenue. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think this is going to improve matters?
So I'd hope that the fact that it's a piece that'll be managed by revenue, that we would see a change in how derelict sites are managed and, then being brought into use. However, it is going to take, by the looks of at least 2 years for this to come into being. So again, these are, and obviously, housing is something that is long term. It does take time, but we won't see the outcome of this for some time to come. But hopefully by making it, putting it within the remit of the revenue will make a difference.
Now, the Minister also announced the extension of the Living City initiative. What's that, people may ask? Well, it's to get more people to live above commercial properties. Do you think that's going to bring more properties on stream for renting?
Well, I definitely think the fact that they've brought more towns within the scope of the Living City initiative is good. Towns like Athlone, Dundalk, Drogheda, Letterkenny, and I'm pretty sure there was one more in there. But I think that is definitely needed. Investment is needed in our regional towns, beyond our cities, and hopefully there are people on the ground locally in those areas who are aware of properties that can be refurbished and can bring them back into use. And also, it's no longer just properties that were built before 1915. Right. It's going to be those that were built before 1975. So there definitely is huge potential there.
All right. OK. Thank you for your reaction this evening to the budget. Anne-Marie O'Reilly, National Advocacy Manager with Threshold. We appreciate it. Now, coming up next, the Minister for Enterprise, Peter Burke. Do stay with us. We're joined now by Minister for Enterprise, Tourism and Employment, Peter Burke. Good afternoon, Minister.
Good afternoon, Claire.
OK, so we're cutting the hospitality VAT rate from 13.5% to 9%. Is this a permanent move?
It is indeed. It's intended to take this argument off the table for future years. And one of the key things that I've said to the sector representatives is now the key focus needs to look at how we develop the sector in the future, how we enhance their digitalisation, how we enhance their sustainability and make the model more sustainable and grow our employment growth, because your listeners will be very much aware of the authentic offering that our independent restaurants and our tourism providers have right across our country. And it's important that we continue to invest in that. And I know, acting on the evidence, we saw in the last quarter a 1.7% reduction in employment in that sector. We saw about 4.3% reduction in full-time employment, which really points to the increased costs that they have been borne over the last number of months.
Bearing that in mind, Minister, if your aim is to help small businesses in crisis, why are you waiting until next July to bring this in?
Well, everything is about affordability in a budget, and in a budget you have to make choices, because there's other measures I want to do for the enterprise economy, and the key thing is the retention of jobs. And when I look at research, development and innovation, I want to significantly increase the tax credit there, which I have by 5%, and that will ensure that we'll have many exciting companies in our country building new laboratories, having new products, having new services and having high value productivity jobs, and that will ensure that as a country we have very high value jobs for our people, which is most important.
You want the extra money for that because it's going to cost 232 million for 2026. But then next year, if this is a permanent move, or the year after, we're talking 681 million euro. And you're saying this evening it is staying, it is a permanent move, and not one likely to see change on in budget 2027.
Absolutely, and that's why if we continue along our economic model by staying within our budgetary parameters, and secondly, which is most importantly, if you look at our income tax take over the last number of years, we have continued to grow at about 4 to 6% every single year. And if we continue growing our economy, which these measures are about, these are about maintaining high value jobs, ensuring we continue growing our jobs market, enhancing that 440,000 people that are now working post the pandemic extra. And that's where we need to be as an economy and get more good quality jobs in.
Okay, Minister, but questions have been asked around the justification for this. This has been labelled a McBudget, a Big Mac budget by opposition, because this measure is going to, as we know, hugely benefit fast food chains. Why are you giving this money to them?
Well, first of all, I would say that 150,000 jobs in the sector depend on this measure. 75% of those businesses employ less than 10 people. It's very clear under the VAT EU directive that you cannot differentiate between businesses or discriminate under the tax code. And I would also point out, secondly, to those people who are saying that many of those people are businesses that are operated in the community. Many people own franchises, are local community members. But we have
heard from the Small Firms Association, and they say why they welcome this move. It's only going to positively impact 1 in 4 small businesses.
Absolutely would not agree with that. It's very clear from the evidence that I have.
Well, that's what the Small Firms Association are saying.
It's very
who
clear.
Represent small firms.
It's very clear from the evidence that I have that 75% of those employ less than 10 people. 150,000 jobs will be sustained in that sector, and those are your independent, authentic restaurants. But to be very clear, as I pointed out, when you refer to some of those bigger corporations, they are franchises operated by people in our community who employ people in our community.
But
so we must be careful in the language that we use.
They also stand to gain far more from this VAT cut because of the scale of their business. And then the benefit for small businesses that are struggling is much less. How does that make sense?
No, the benefit from small business is very significant. So if you take the average cup of coffee, so at the moment they collect about 42 cent in VAT from the average cup of coffee. That will reduce from July to 28 cent. And that means there's a viability reduction of 14 cent into businesses to help them grow. And what we will see in very rural parts of our country now is that we have a very strong value proposition for our tourism sector. We'll have in rural parts that continued growth, and that will allow us, as we expand our tourism offerings now on the globe, trying to bring more tourists in here, which we have a very significant budget for, we will have more employment in rural areas, and that's going to be key to our success as an economy. It's where I want to be as Enterprise Minister, and I don't go differentiating and dividing businesses. That's never a good way to do a budget.
Okay, all right, but let's look at this money, and I suppose when you are implementing a VAT cut like this, what it will mean for everyone else if it's just solely on one sector. And the Fiscal Advisory Council has come out on that, and we know they have said that the cost of this would be an equivalent per year of increasing the standard rate income tax bands by €3,000. We've obviously not seen that in this budget. Hiring 11,400 nurses or recruiting an extra 7,800 teachers.
Well, first of all, I don't think those full figures are correct, because the tax package in this budget is €1.3 billion. My measure at €232 million is about 17% of the total available tax take. So that is not using up the whole budget. It allows me to do other things that bring higher value jobs into our economy, like our R&D. And your listeners need to be very much aware. I want to make this point.
Minister, and I want to ask you, and just stay on this point.
If I could make a very important point very briefly, is that, our IDA lost about 6% of our jobs last year. And if we continue on that measure, that would leave us in a difficulty. And that's why enhancing our value offering to R&D ensures we have high value jobs coming in. And I know that jobs are
even if it is only a fraction of that, because I know that you were saying this will cost €232 million as distinct from 681 million, which it would in a full year. You're still looking at the standard rate income tax bands, not increasing by, say, €1,000. You're looking at a number like thousands of extra nurses not being recruited there, and the recruiting of extra teachers in the thousands not being done because of this particular measure that is only going to impact one sector.
That's not correct. So first of all, we need money to employ our public services. All our public servants will see an increase under the public service pay deal. And secondly, to that, which is critical, to drive our enterprise economy forward.
Yes, but I just want to ask you specifically on that public service recruitment. Those at the front line, teachers, nurses.
Absolutely, and we're doing that. We have a record budget for the Department of Health.
How do you do that when you're spending €232 million next year and €681 million in subsequent years?
Because the point you are missing, Claire, is that you cannot exclude the enterprise economy or incentivising jobs growth from the expenditure side where we employ more public servants. I know I worked a decade through a very difficult time as a chartered accountant in practice, and in the boardrooms that I worked in, what we were talking about is how many people do you think you'll have to let go this week? I never want to go back into that situation, and that's why I know you can never take jobs growth for granted, and we have to ensure that in order to keep growing our jobs in our country, we have to put money to the enterprise economy, to our restaurants, to ensure that we have regional jobs growth, and critically through research and innovation to ensure that we're getting that high productivity into our economy, which is so important.
We don't have a lot of time, so I just want to move on, but is this briefly, because people will want to know at home, is it going to mean cheaper food in the businesses that are getting the VAT reduction? Is it going to mean a cheaper haircut, because it's also applying to the hairdressing sector?
No, because if we're being honest with people, you cannot have a viability mechanism and an affordability mechanism together. Both do not work hand in hand. This is a measure trying to build up the resilience of the sector and ensure we grow the employment in those sectors. And when I have my new tourism policy out next month, that's the key thing I will be focused on, looking how we develop the sectors, making them more stronger,
it to be passed on to consumers.
Absolutely, I'm very clear on that. It's a viability measure, it's not affordability measure. You can't have both, Claire.
I need to ask you, Minister, briefly, alongside the VAT cut, there is the new minimum wage rise. Criticism has come in this afternoon around it by the Small Firms Association, Retail Ireland, Retail Excellence, the latter saying it's short-sighted and anti-business and it will force some to close. What do you say to that?
Well, we've taken viability measures to help people absorb the cost of the minimum wage. The second point I would really make is that a number of our business leaders are on the Low Pay Commission. They voted unanimously in favour of this 4% increase, which is about 200,000 workers, and we've increased the tax code in USC to enable them to keep as much of that money as possible. And we have to ensure that work pays and that we reward work, because we're a party that rewards enterprise in Fine Gael. It's the core tenet of how we grow our economy. And if we continue holding those businesses together, because I'm about doing things simpler, lighter, faster. I have a host of grants now to support those small family businesses
and they
that
can
really
afford
will assist them.
Minimum wage rise.
They will assist them in their sustainability in terms of reducing their utility bills. I can see methods whereby you can reduce the utility bill of a small deli by €1,000 a month by doing energy efficiency measures. And that's why I want to work with businesses to ensure we make them more sustainable, not putting on sticking plasters every year that become multi-annual and would lead our country to drive it over a cliff.
OK, Minister, we're going to leave it there. Minister for Enterprise, Tourism and Employment, Peter Burke, thank you.
RTÉ Radio 1.
Welcome back. It's 5 o'clock. Still to come on today's Drive Time. Budget 26, we hear from Minister for Public Expenditure Jack Chambers and get reaction from hospitality, carers and older charity Alone. We ask how climate friendly the budget is. We get opposition reaction from Sinn Féin's Mairead Farrell, and we hear from Independent TD and Minister of State at the Department of Transport Sean Canny. All that and lots more, but first the news read by Shane McGowan.
Good evening. The government has unveiled what it calls a pro-investment budget with significant measures to encourage more home building. Overall, there are tax cuts of €1.3 billion with increased spending measures of €8.4 billion. Our economics and public affairs editor David Murphy.
The minimum wage increases by 65 cents per hour to €14.15. VAT for hospitality and hairdressers falls from 13.5% to 9%, as does the tax on the sale of apartments. A packet of 20 cigarettes goes up by 50 cents, and there is an increase in carbon tax. Social welfare rates and the state pension increase by €10 per week, and the Christmas bonus will be paid to 1.5 million people. The fuel allowance rises by €5 per week.
The Minister for Finance, Paschal Donohoe, described Ireland's economy as resilient and said that Budget 2026 would help Ireland adapt in a time of change.
This budget builds up our resilience and will help us to adapt at a time of historic challenge and change for our economy and our society. Ceann Comhairle, our economy has proven to be remarkably resilient. And this is due to the transformation of our country in recent decades.
Criticising the government's budget plans, the opposition parties said they were designed to help developers instead of ordinary people and had done nothing for workers, as well as ignoring the biggest crisis facing Irish society. Sinn Féin, Labour and the Social Democrats outlined their situation in the initial response to the budget plans this afternoon. Sinn Féin's finance spokesperson Piers Doherty told the Dáil that the budget plans bear no connection with what's actually going on in the real world.
When all the clapping is done, when all the backslapping is over and the government benches die down, when the dust settles and all of the spin that we've heard, the bluster, the deluded arrogance that's come dripping from both ministers' speeches, ordinary people, where are they? They're left in the cold. Hard reality written here in the black and white of this budget.
Members of the family of the convicted murderer Jozef Puška have been told they should get their affairs in order before the 22nd of October, as there's a real risk they will be jailed for offences connected with the murder of Aisling Murphy almost 4 years ago. Puška's brothers Marek Puška and Lubomir Puška, as well as Jozef Puška's wife Lucia Istakova, are all due to be sentenced for withholding information from Gardaí. Puška's sisters-in-law Viera Gaziova and Josefina Grudzova were found guilty of assisting an offender. Our legal affairs correspondent Orla O'Donnell.
Aisling Murphy was stabbed to death by Jozef Puška in a random attack on the afternoon of January the 12th, 2022. Marek and Lubomir Puška, as well as Jozef's wife Lucia Istakova, withheld information from Gardaí when they spoke to them after the murder. Marek and Lubomir's wives, Josefina Grudzova and Viera Gaziova, assisted Jozef Puška by burning his clothes. Miss Justice Caroline Biggs heard pleas in mitigation from lawyers for each of the 5 convicted people. Defence lawyers asked the court for leniency and said their clients would face difficulties in prison as they were not Irish. The court heard family members had come to Ireland in around 2013 and were members of the Roma community, which psychologists' reports suggested may have had a bearing on the offences. The court heard they have 14 children between them, all under the age of 16. Ms Justice Biggs urged them to put their affairs in order, as she said there was a very real risk of a custodial sentence for each of them. The judge will sentence them after hearing victim impact evidence from Aisling Murphy's family on October the 22nd.
The funerals of Mark, Louise and Evan O'Connor have taken place in County Louth. The bodies of 54-year-old Mark, 56-year-old Louise and their 27-year-old son Evan were found at their home in Drumgownagh last week. 31-year-old Robert O'Connor of Drumgownagh has appeared in court charged with 3 counts of murder. Before the end of the funeral mass, Cian O'Connor paid tribute to his mother, father and younger brother.
No words can truly reflect how we all feel, how I feel. It's something that may take an age to come to terms with, and a part of each of us may never heal. However, while it's difficult to comprehend, it's not something that we should ignore or forget or allow to overshadow the wonderful lives of my family. My family would want to celebrate the rich lives they led, to remember the good times and to remember the memories they left behind.
RTÉ Radio 1 weather with Grant. Discover next generation comfort for your home with the new Grant Airona R290 heat pump. Think heating, think Grant.
Generally cloudy with rain and drizzle becoming confined to the south and east. Any lingering rain will clear early tonight, leaving a generally dry night. Turning more cloudy in the west and north overnight with patches of drizzle and isolated patches of mist and fog. Lowest temperatures 3 to 8 degrees.
RTÉ Radio 1 traffic and travel with the all-new, all-electric Hyundai Ioniq 9. The 7-seater built for supreme comfort. Now at showrooms nationwide.
With the latest traffic and travel news, I'm Neil O'Sheridan. In Galway, the Quincentennial Bridge eastbound through to the old Dublin Road outbound is backed up between the Newcastle Road junction and the Skerrit roundabout. In Cork, the Model Farm Road eastbound is congested between Mount Mercy College and Dennehy's Cross, while in Limerick there's a delay on the Dock Road eastbound between the Courtbrack Avenue junction and the Shannon Bridge roundabout. In Louth, there's been a spillage on the M1 northbound between Junction 11 Monaster Boyce and Junction 13 Dunleer. That's affecting the left lane. And in Dublin, finally, there's an incident on the M50 southbound affecting the left and auxiliary lanes between Junction 7 Lucan and Junction 9 Red Cow. The Stillorgan Road southbound is slow from the Mount Marion Avenue junction to the Newtown Park Avenue junction, and there's been an incident in the left lane near Oatlands College. That's the latest traffic and travel news for now.
Míle buchas faoi sin, Neil. Now, Budget 2026 delivered a mixed bag for the hospitality sector. Restaurants and hairdressers will see their VAT rate cut from July next. At the same time, though, the minimum wage is rising to €14.15 an hour. For more reaction to this, I'm joined by Adrian Cummins, who's Chief Executive of the Restaurants Association of Ireland, and Laura Bambrick, who's Social Affairs Officer with the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. You're both very welcome indeed to the programme. I'll come to you, Adrian. First of all, you lobbied hard to get the VAT rate reduced to €9, or 9% for those focusing on food and catering. What difference will this make, do you think?
Well, first of all, we're thankful to the government for their reduction in the VAT rate to 9%. We've lobbied since the budget of last year around this issue. They can see where we're coming from now in terms of the viability of our industry, the profitability, and what this gives our sector now is stability from into the future, where our businesses can now plan in terms of where they're going to go in terms of growth or of their business. What we've seen over the last number of years is we've seen many restaurants close down across the state because they weren't viable, and the reason for that was the cost structure was out of kilter. And we have had major wage inflation over the last number of years due to the housing prices in the country.
But this won't be implemented, this 9%, until July. Will that be a problem for some business, do you think?
So it's going to be a problem for many businesses that are labour intensive when they will have an extra 6.5% payroll cost on the 1st of January. But in saying that, you know, we're very thankful to the 9% from the government. I'd like to thank Minister Burke for all his work at the cabinet table to support our industry and get it over the line with the two ministers in finance. But it's important to point out that there's a lot of businesses now across the state that we find it very difficult next year in terms of extra cost from that wage inflation.
Okay, we'll come to that in just a second. But let me bring in Adrian, Laura Bambrick from ICTU. An awful lot of business will struggle with the extra cost, he says, but at least the 9% VAT rate will bring stability. Is that how you see it as well?
No, Cormac, this is unjustified and an untargeted and a grossly inflated subsidy to a sector. If we look at this sector and the sector overall, that's not to take away that there may be individual businesses that are struggling, but this is a sector-wide measure that was announced today. We're talking about 681 million. And when we're talking about big figures, it can be difficult for people to get their head around it. What it equates to is every worker in this country, what the minister described as the backbone of the economy. It's equivalent to every one of those workers handing over every hospitality and every food service business and every hairdressing €250. That's without getting a meal served. That's without getting a blow dry. Yeah. Nothing out of it. Well, a handover of a subsidy.
How is that justifiable, Adrian?
Well, let's put a bit of context to this now, Richard. There was a programme for government announced by earlier, just after the general election, and within the programme for government, it did say that the government were going to look at PRSI and VAT rates for hospitality and retail. The Taoiseach came out in June and said he was given a solemn promise with regard to the hospitality sector, because he could see and he was hearing it on the ground in terms of the difficulties that we're going through. And we've had this 9% VAT rate since 2011, and this new commentary that I've seen...
I know that, but multinational companies, multi-million euro enterprises will get this.
Let me deal with that as well, Richard.
That's the truth, though.
Let me deal with that as well, this claim around the multinational... These, let's call it a multinational, has franchise-driven businesses across the state. For example, Adrian Cummins could purchase a franchise from a multinational and run it in Portumna, County Galway, if he so wish, and employ locally, purchase locally, and serve locally, and create jobs in a town that badly needs it. Yeah. And that can be done in many places across the country. And to be fair to the hospitality sector, You know, we create jobs in parts of Ireland where it's the only show in town in terms of job creation.
Let me go back to Laura on that. I mean, franchise local business. What's wrong with them getting the VAT rate cut?
And many of those franchise own multiple franchise, and they bring in tens of millions. And what we have handed them today is a 4.5% of their turnover. So they're going to get a 4.5% of their turnover, the same as the CAF and the restaurants. We're hearing a lot about hotels have been left out. It's targeted. Hotels will get this on the food services they sell. So will pubs. And so will every business, regardless of their financial viability or not.
And if they employ people on the minimum wage, that will increase from January. How bad is that?
It will increase, and the Minister for Workers, because he's also the Minister for Workers as well as for business, within 100 days of him coming to offices, he had done a U-turn on a previous commitment that those same workers would have a living wage from January. They would have to wait another 3 years.
But it's an improvement. You'll have to acknowledge that, Laura.
Because of that, it's 65 cent instead of 95 cent. So for every minimum wage worker, the same worker that's given over 250 euros to every food service business and hairdresser in this country, they are down 30 cent an hour or 11.70 a week or over 600 euros a year. So they are paying on the double.
Let me get a final word from Adrian. Yeah, the minimum wage is increasing for employers, but you do have the VAT rate cut. Are you still winning as a business in hospitality, do you think, Adrian?
Well, when you look at it into the round, business owners are texting me here. They're looking at their VAT bill from July of next year, and they're looking at the wage bill come 1st of January. So one will rule out the other, and one may not rule out the other in terms of the wage inflation in our country. And I just wanted to point out one thing. The unions should be very happy, because they're getting double inflation in terms of a minimum wage increase. I mean, inflation is only at 2%. They're getting a 5% increase.
Yeah, I don't have time to go back to Laura, but it's a very high cost economy. Food inflation hits everyone, and so does energy bills. We'll discuss that with Minister Jack Chambers, the Minister for Public Expenditure, later on in the programme, as well as Minister Darragh O'Leary. For the moment, though, Adrian Cummins, Chief Executive of the Restaurants Association of Ireland, and Laura Bambrick-Victu, thank you.
Now, for those over 66, there are a number of measures in this budget that will impact them. Sean Moynihan is the CEO of the Alone charity. He joins me now on the line. Sean, an increase of €10 in the state pension, something to be welcomed?
Look, I suppose any increase is always to be welcomed, and the increase in the fuel allowance, and obviously there's housing grants, which is a huge issue for us. But I suppose the challenge for us is pre-budget was always to focus on the older people who lived, especially the old, who lived on their own. And they had, CSO data is, they had the highest risk of poverty of any age group. And they will be around 300 worse off in this budget than they were with the once-off measures. So we've done some targeting, but ultimately is we needed a lot more.
Yeah, we've heard from Social Justice Ireland in their reaction. They've said that €10 increase in core social welfare rates, and they probably would be including the pension in that, fails to compensate for the damage that inflation continues to wreak on poorer households. And a €25 boost was the minimum required by government to benchmark rates to 27.5% of average weekly earnings. I mean, do you believe that, with the inflationary costs that are impacting on older people especially, that €10 simply wasn't enough?
It simply wasn't. I mean, at the end of the day, we work closely with Social Justice Ireland, and their numbers are usually fairly bulletproof. Ultimately, our ask was the same for theirs on the pension. And obviously, there are different groups of older people. But for those who are generally relying only on the state pension, they have fallen further behind in the last few years. And people on fixed incomes are always the most vulnerable. I think there's been a lot of talk about targeting. We understand the once-off had to go. But ultimately is we may not have yet at government level or at state level and social protection level fully understood how we target, how we make sure we reach those most at risk and follow the poverty figures, follow what the CSO tell us. And ultimately for us, that was always the older people on their own who have the highest rates of a risk poverty of any age group.
Now, what about the fuel allowance increase and the measures to be introduced in the housing adaptation grants that were announced today?
Well, look, housing adaptation grants have been sort of, for the last 10 years, there's been really around 13,000 adaptation grants being distributed. So an increase to 17,000 is excellent. The reality is for those we've helped with housing adaptation grants, in one of the quarters last year, around 60% of the support was about getting people bathrooms. So this is about people's dignity and safety of aging at home or staying at home or else coming home from hospital. So those grants are to be welcomed, and ultimately and we continue to work with the government to streamline that system so people can ultimately get that support as quickly as possible. We see there's some increase in home care in the next couple of days, whether the housing allocations of money to the Department of Housing, we hope there's more focus on housing for older people, because how do you pay the rent when you retire? And ultimately, as we unpack what's coming in the health budget, we'll see ultimately how our age groups and others have been supported.
All right, there we'll leave it. Sean Moynihan, CEO of the Alone charity, thank you for joining us on the line this evening with your reaction to the budget. We're going to join Catherine Cox now, the Head of Communications and Policy with Family Carers Ireland. Catherine, you're welcome to the programme. Can I get your reaction to Budget 26? You were looking for delivery on promises around the carers allowance and what it would mean for carers up and down the country. What's your verdict on what's been announced in today's budget?
Yeah, so look, we welcome the increase in the income disregard. It's gone up to €1,000 for a single person and €2,000 for a couple. So that is significant, and we absolutely welcome that. It does mean it'll bring thousands more carers into the net for carers allowance. However, we did ask for a clear roadmap as to when the means test will be abolished in full. We haven't got that. And the other thing to say is that for the thousands of family carers out there who are already on carers allowance, they will just see a €10 increase per week in their core payment, and that certainly falls well short of meeting, increase in food, energy, household costs and caring costs as well. So look, welcome the increase in income disregards, but we are disappointed around it's not bringing carers allowance anywhere near an adequate and fair income for the work that family carers do.
Yeah, when the promises were made in the programme for government, Catherine, they have promised to do away with the means test for carers, but that this would be done incrementally. I mean, would you have expected more in this budget in terms of the income disregard that they're talking about? Would you have liked to have seen more than €1,000 for a single person and €2,000 for a couple?
Look, we would love to see the abolition of the means test today. We would love to see carers recognised and valued for the work that they do. But we did recognise that it may not be done in one sweep. So they have gone actually above of what we thought they might do around that income disregard. But again, I have to go back to the fact that, the carers allowance at the moment is €260 per week. €10 increase is bringing it to €270 per week. Nobody can live on €270 per week. Never mind the fact that these are carers, many of them full-time, with additional costs of caring, additional lighting, additional heating, additional food costs. And I think when we look at carers, we have to go broader than just what happened in social protection today. Because if we look at our health services, so many carers are having to pay for therapies, equipment, assessments to prove their person they're caring for actually has an illness or a disability. So they're constantly fighting, constantly under financial pressure. So €10 per week is just not going to cut the mustard on that one.
I'm struck, Catherine, by in the reaction from Family Carers Ireland, they've said that this increase equates to less than 6 cents per hour for someone providing 24-hour care. I mean, what do you expect to hear now from your members on the decision to increase the carers allowance and carers benefit by just €10?
Oh, look, there's no doubt carers will be disappointed. Many will be angry. Many will be upset. And it's not just that, as I said, the increase in that payment, but the fact that services and supports are so inefficient and so underfunded and resourced across the country. I think respite in particular, we've thousands of respite who 60 or 72% of carers surveyed last year told us they've never received respite. They've never got emergency respite when they're in an emergency or crisis situation. So if we look at the broader context, today's budget, while it will bring thousands more carers into the net for carers allowance, it's not enough. It doesn't go far enough.
All right, thank you for your reaction this evening, Catherine Cox of Family Carers. Now coming up next, the Minister for Public Expenditure